cutie, I'm back. And today we have another episode of Beauty and the Bibliophile. If you're new here, welcome to my channel and welcome to the Cute Life. I'm your cult leader, Leah. If you're not new here, thank you for coming back for another cult meeting. On Wednesdays, I try to do a series called Beauty and the Bibliophile, where I do my makeup and I tell you about the latest book that I've read. If you don't know what a bibliophile is, it is a lover and collector of books. That's me. Today's book is another Disney twisted tale. It is called Go the Distance, and it is the twisted tale of Hercules, and it's by Jen Colonita. Jen is one of my favorite authors of the Twisted Tales books. She also did the Snow White one, which I really liked. And I have to say, I thought this was her best work that I've read thus far. I think this is probably my second favorite Twisted Tale that I've ever read. Second only to the Cinderella Twisted Tale. This book is full of symbolism. A lot of it comes from the Greek mythology that it's based on, but you know me and symbolism, it is my jam. Now, I feel a little bit silly saying this, but this book got me a little bit emotional, as you shall see. I don't know. I don't know why I think it's a great idea to do my makeup and then talk about things that make me emotional, but that's what I do here, I guess. Also, there are spoiler alerts. I don't talk about everything in the book, but I do talk about enough so that it makes sense. You'll know the ending. So yeah, if you don't want to know what this book is about, or you don't want any spoilers, don't watch this video. If you're trying to decide if you want to read this book and you don't mind a few spoilers, then keep watching. Also, I'm going to assume that you've seen the movie Hercules, that this book is a twisted tale of. If you haven't seen the movie, then this book is probably not going to make a lot of sense. So I would recommend watching the movie first and then watching this video and or reading the book. Also, there are a lot of Greek words in this book, and I don't know what it is about the Greek language. It is the hardest language for me to pronounce. I looked up a lot and I did the best I could, but there are still a lot of struggles when it comes to the pronunciation of certain words for me. So the ones that I really struggle with, I will put up on the screen. Hopefully that will help you. It doesn't help me. So anyway, if you want to hear a summary of Go the Distance and watch me do my makeup at the same time, stay tuned. Okay, so Go the Distance, a twisted tale of Hercules. So this book starts where the movie left off, and when Hercules asks his dad if he can stay mortal so that he can be with Meg, instead of saying yes, Zeus says no. He says that Hercules is a god now and his place is on Mount Olympus. Hercules asks, well, if I can't be immortal, can Meg stay here with me on Mount Olympus? And again, Zeus, he's like, no, she's immortal and Mount Olympus is no place for a mortal. So while Hercules is trying to convince his dad to either let him stay on Earth or let Meg stay on Mount Olympus so they could be together, Hera, Zeus's wife and Hercules' mom and the goddess of marriage and family, goes up to Meg and she's like, look, I'll make you a deal. If you go on a quest for me, I'll make you a god, and then you can stay on Mount Olympus with Hercules forever. So at this point, Meg kind of flashes back to her childhood, and we get a glimpse into what her childhood was like. Now, her and her parents were always fighting about finances. Her dad was not good with money, and her parents were constantly fighting about it. And then one day, her father just left. So her and her mom were left on their own, and they struggled to pay the rent and to feed themselves. And one day they had to just completely skip out on the rent, and Meg had to leave the only home that she knew. And when Meg's mother told her that her father had left, Meg began to cry. And her mom was like, don't cry. Never cry over a man. Never let a man dim your light. Let this be a lesson to you that you can't trust anybody but yourself. So Meg learned pretty early that love was more trouble than it was worth. Now back to the scene on Mount Olympus. While Hera, Hercules' mom, is talking to Meg, she kind of overhears in the background while talking to Hera, Aphrodite and Demeter talking. And Demeter is very upset because her daughter, Persephone, is missing. And she's worried about this because her harvest duties on Earth are coming up soon, and nobody seems to know where she is. Okay, I'm gonna let my skincare set in for a few minutes, and then we'll move on to makeup. So Meg kind of, refocuses and starts listening to Hera again. And this is when Hera tells her her quest. She says that she needs Meg to understand that love is a strength, not a weakness. That putting your trust in someone else doesn't mean that you're not able to stand on your own 2 feet. And Meg's like, well, I already know that. And Hera's like, oh, really? And Meg's like, yeah. And Hera goes, so then why haven't you told Hercules about Aegis or your mother? So then Meg flashes back to when she's 13, and it's just her and her mother on their own. They're struggling, of course. And one day, Meg's mother spends their food money on a flute for Meg. And Meg is furious. She can't believe her mother was so irresponsible. And her mom was like, listen, if you learn to play and you get good, you can play in the square and we'll make money. Reluctantly, Meg decided, okay, I'll try and play. She picked it up, and she kind of actually found out she was kind of good at it, and she kind of liked it. So then she would go to the square and listen to other musicians play, and she taught herself how to play. Then one day, her mom was like, okay, I think you're good enough to play for other people. So she goes to take her to the square to perform, and Meg is super nervous. But her mom's like, hey, listen, people want to hear you play. They're gonna wanna hear you. She's like, you're a survivor like me. Always remember that. And remember, whatever happens, you can handle it. She's like, always trust yourself. And her mother was right. When she played in the square and she lost herself in the music, people would toss coins and money at her feet. Now, one day there was a terrible accident, and Meg's mother got pinned under a cart and she was dying. And Meg rushed to her side and she was crying. She was like, Mother, don't leave me, please. And she told Meg, she's like, don't worry, you will be okay. Trust yourself. Remember, whatever happens, you can handle it. And then her mom, like kind of always being kind of a little bit of a jokester, she was like, you're a big girl, you're tough. You tie your own sandals and everything. And then she died. So Meg snaps out of her flashback and she's like, okay, I get your point. I need to deal with the loss of my mother. But what does that have to do with this quest that you're sending me on? And Hera's like, she's like, you'll understand in time. But for now, all you have to worry about is finding the lost double flute of Athena. And Meg's like, okay, so all I have to do to become a god is to find Athena's lost double flute? And Hera smiles and she's like, well, that's just the first part. So Meg, thinking about a chance to be with Hercules forever, she accepts her offer. And as soon as she says, I accept, she feels an hourglass form in her hand. And there's pink grains on one side and the other side is empty. And then the pink grains start slowly trickling over to the empty side. And Hera's like, you have 10 days to complete your quest. And then she disappears. So just then, Hercules comes walking up and he's like, I got nowhere with my father. He's upset. But then Meg tells him about the quest that Hera is sending her on so that they can be together. And Hercules is very excited. He's very encouraging. He's like, you can do it. This is gonna be awesome. And he's like, so what do you have to do? And she's like, well, I have to start with finding Athena's lost double flute. She's like, but I have no idea where to start. She's like, have you heard anything about this? And he had heard that it had gotten stolen from some kind of a river monster. Then Hercules said he thought it was kind of strange that his mom would send her on a mission and not give her like any clues. So Meg looks at the hourglass. She's kind of turning it around, looking at it. She sees a word. I have no idea how to pronounce this word. So I'm gonna put it up on the screen, but I think it's Cophonesia. I'm sorry. Anyway, she shows it to Hercules and she's like, does this word mean something to you? And he's like, I think it's the name of an island. He's like, I think it might even be near Phil's island. And he turns her around and he takes her to the edge of the cloud and he points down into like a blue area. There's a bunch of islands littered about. And he's like, yeah, I think it's down there. And Hercules suggested, he's like, you should find Phil and take him with you. He was a huge help to me. And that's like what he does. He helps heroes. And Meg was like, oh, no. That menace hates me. And Hercules is like, he doesn't hate you. He just thought you were a distraction. And, you know, the whole deal you had going on with Hades, you know, that kind of pissed him off. But, you know, he likes you now. He's like, besides, he's a great guide. He can really help you. And Meg's like, I don't need anybody's help. I can do this on my own. And Hercules is like, I know, you can do it. But, you know, I really wish I could go with you. But that wasn't going to happen. They knew that. So Hercules goes and he gets a magic orchid and he gives it to her. And he says, think of this as like a messenger to the gods. He's like, if you ever need me, just pull one of the petals and say my name and I'll be there. But the thing was, the orchid only had 3 petals. So there was a limit to how many times she could call on Hercules for help. Then Hercules told her, he's like, you know, you're my world and I can't imagine spending an eternity without you. He's like, why don't you take Pegasus with you? He's like, it's faster way to travel and he can help you too. So Pegasus comes trotting over and Hercules puts some saddlebags on him with some supplies for her. And then Pegasus like bumps her and scoops her up onto his back and he jumps from the cloud and everybody on Mount Olympus could hear Meg scream. So they landed on the island and Meg had Pegasus fly around the island and do a little survey work while she went through the supplies from the saddlebags. And inside there was a smaller bag, like a satchel. So she put her hourglass, the orchid, and a slingshot in there that Hercules had packed away for her. And she, you know, kept it on her body. She was like, I better keep these items close. Now, the island was beautiful, had white sand beaches, which surrounded a forest with a high hill that Meg could see off in the distance with a waterfall. Now, when Pegasus got back from his flight, they suddenly heard the sound of a flute playing. So Meg gets on Pegasus' back and they follow the sound of the flute up to the waterfall that Meg had noticed when they landed. Now, when they landed near the waterfall, Meg found that there was an entrance to a cave on the back side of the water. And she went to go inside. Pegasus kind of jumps in front of her. He seemed worried, like he didn't want her to go. And Meg was like, listen, I can do this. She said, I've got my slingshot and I need to do this for Hercules. So Pegasus kind of reluctantly let her go. She collected a few rocks from the ground and put those in her satchel too. And this kind of made Pegasus feel a little better. So she enters the cave and she can hear the flute playing even louder. And she recognizes the song as the first song that she ever taught herself to play, which was Plight of the Lily. So she made her way through the cave, which was lit by torches, and she follows the path and she comes to a big cavern, and there's a beautiful woman sitting on a throne and playing Athena's flute. Now her playing was mesmerizing, and Meg started to feel a little bit sleepy. And she thought, you know, would it be such a bad idea if I kind of just sat down and rested for a while? And she could feel her eyes getting heavy. And then all of a sudden she heard a voice in her head tell her, she's like, Megara, snap out of it, focus. And she comes out of her little bit of a trance and opens her eyes. Now when she opened her eyes, the woman was standing just inches from her face. And she was very beautiful. She had blue eyes and dark hair. And she circled Meg and she's like, what are you doing here? And she's circling Meg, kind of sizing her up. And Meg is like, I know that tune very well. She's like, I know how to play it too. The woman is like, oh, really? She's like, have you come here to play for me? Meg's like, yeah, I can play for you if you like. She's like, people say that, you know, I play so well, I could put Cerberus to sleep. We'll find out more who Cerberus is later. And the woman's eyes widen like, really? And Meg's like, yeah, I can show you. And she holds her hand out for the flute. And you can tell the woman is kind of like suspicious, but she wants to know what she's talking about. So she goes to hand her the flute. Then all of a sudden, everything around Meg bursts into flames and the woman transforms into an empusa. Now an empusa is a vampire-like beast that seduces men and then feasts on their flesh and blood. But they're not against eating women as well. So Meg runs and the empusa puts the flute on a strap and slings it over her shoulder. And while Meg is running, she realizes that she's not running on solid ground anymore, but on piles of bones. And the empusa keeps chasing after her. And she's like, you've come here to take something that's not yours. And Meg is like, well, it's not yours either. That's Athena's flute and she wants it back. And the empusa's like, well, if she wants it back, she's gonna have to take it from my dead hands. And then the empusa lunges forward at her. So Meg grabs a skull and she chucks it at the empusa and it hits the empusa and she starts screaming, she falls back. So right then, Pegasus comes flying in and Meg jumps on his back and they go to try to escape out of the cave. But they can hear the empusa behind them screaming and gaining on them. And then the empusa grabs Pegasus's tail. So Meg grabs one of the rocks in her satchel and she throws it at the empusa, and this makes the empusa let go of Pegasus' tail. Pegasus flies at full speed and he goes right through the waterfall, followed by the empusa. So Meg looks back behind them and she can still see the flute hanging on a strap around the empusa's neck. Meg sees another cave and she tells Pegasus to dive into that cave, and he does. And the empusa follows him at full speed and she ends up slamming into a wall and knocking herself out. So Meg grabs the flute, and her and Pegasus go running as the Empusa's starting to kind of come to. Now, Peg knew that the Empusa would never stop coming after them unless they killed her. So when they exited the cave, her and Pegasus ran to the top side of the cave where there were some boulders sticking out. And when the Empusa came out of the cave, her and Pegasus pushed the boulders on top of her and killed her. So then she pulls the flute out of her satchel. She holds it up to the heavens, expecting Hera to show up and commend her work. But nothing happened. So Meg didn't really know what to do. So she's like, you know what? I think Hercules was right. I need some guidance. And she tells Pegasus to take me to that cranky satyr before I change my mind. So when they found Phil, he was like, oh no, no, none of this. He's like, I'm retired. I have had enough trouble for 3 lifetimes, and this woman, she's trouble. And Meg tried to explain to him what was going on, but she was kind of having a hard time because she was exhausted and injured. And Phil sees the bruises on her legs and her burn marks on her arms, and he's like, you know what? He's like, I'll patch you up, but then you two are on your way. He's like, I don't want to know anything about what you're doing, but I'll help you heal. And then Meg collapsed. Now when she woke up, she was in Phil's place. And she's like, how long have I been here? And he's like, about a day. And she's like, panics. She's like, oh my God, I've lost a day. And again, she was like asking him if she would help her and guide her. But he was like, I'm sorry, I can't. I'm retired now. Meg started to explain to him like what had happened, how she had found the flute, and how, you know, she had expected for Hera or Athena to show up, but they hadn't. So she had come to him on like what to do next. She figured that he would know. And he was like, you know, still like, well, I'm not helping you, but have you searched the flute for some sort of message or instructions? And she hadn't, so she looks over the flute, but there's nothing there. And then Phil, thinking again, he's like, well, maybe you need to play it. Maybe Athena needs to hear the flute. And Meg was reluctant because, you know, she doesn't really like playing the flute anymore. It brings up a lot of sad memories, bad memories for her. So, but reluctantly, she starts to kind of play it. And guess what? Athena shows up. Now, Athena is the goddess of war and wisdom. And Athena sees her with her flute. And she's like, where did you get that flute, mortal? And Meg explains to her that she got it from the Empusa who was hiding it from her. And Athena kind of didn't seem like she believed her. She's like, you, a mortal, took it from an Empusa? And Meg's like, yeah. She's like, are you here to offer me some guidance? Athena says, well, that depends. She's like, what is it that you want, Megara? And she's like, I want you to tell me the next part of my quest. And Athena's like, well, why do you want to know that? And Phil blurts out, so she can be with Hercules. And Athena looks at Meg and she's like, is that what you want, Megara? And Meg is like, I think so. And Athena looks at Meg and she's like, you are a mortal who doesn't know what she wants. And because of that, you lack purpose. And Athena's like, how do you expect to finish a quest like this if you don't even know what you're fighting for? And Meg's like, I have purpose. And Athena's like, oh, do you? Is that why you played my flute so beautifully? She's like, we both know you know how to play. And Phil looks at Meg and he's like, you know how to play? He's like, because, you know, earlier it kind of sounded like you didn't. No offense. And Meg was like, well, I know how, but I don't play anymore. And it doesn't matter why, I just don't. And Athena's like, well, therein lies the problem. She's like, Meg, you are going to war. And in war, you have to know what you're fighting for, or you will fall in battle. If you're not questioning where you've been, you'll never understand where you're going. So then Athena finally tells Meg the next part of her quest. And she has to go to the underworld to retrieve a lost soul. And Meg is like, the underworld? She's like, I just got back from there. And Athena's like, you know, quests like these, they're not easy. It's not for the faint of heart. So if you can't handle it. And Meg's like, no, I can do it. Who am I looking for? And Athena's like, her name is Katrina. I believe she stole the heart of someone you once loved. Now here we flash back to 9 years earlier. Meg's mother had died. She's kind of roaming from town to town. She's running from her mother's ghost. And the only thing that she's kept with her from her old life is the rusty old flute that her mother had given her. Now one day she meets a man named Aegis. And he played the lute, which is kind of like a guitar, banjo type of instrument. Now the first time since Meg's mother had passed, she had found herself kind of opening up to another person. They had stuff in common, they both played music, and they started playing music together. And she kind of started falling in love with this guy despite her better judgment. And life with Aegis was pretty easy. He was easy to get along with, he was nice, and now she had someone to create music with. Aegis had mended her broken heart, and they were, you know, talking about marriage, and were on their way there. Now one day, Aegis got very sick, and they didn't have the money for medicine. So she starts going around to everyone that they know and asking for help, but nobody could help her or would help her. So then she starts praying to every god that she can think of. But Aegis only got sicker. The only god that she hadn't prayed to yet was Hades. So she did, and she prayed, Hades, if you heal my love, I will do anything you ask. And then she heard a voice say, anything? Will you give me your soul? And she's like, anything. And she's like, yes. And that was the last word that she said before she started to feel herself fade away from existence. And she tried to grab Aegis' hand, but she felt it slip through her fingers. And she's like, wait, I didn't mean now. I didn't want to go now. And then she disappeared before she even got to see Aegis open his eyes. Then she found herself in complete darkness. She squinted her eyes really hard, trying to adjust her sight. And she found herself in a dimly lit cave. Then Hades appeared. And he told Meg, he's like, you work for me now. And Meg, still trying to process where she is and what's happening, she starts screaming, Aegis, Aegis. And Hades is like, you know, he can't hear you. He's like, you know, he's fine. He's better, but he can't hear you. He's like, if you do what I say, you'll go back to him and the land of the living. And Meg said, she's like, okay, yeah, let's get started right away. I'll do anything you want. She's like, I just want to get back home. And Hades is like, he's like, you know, I admire the work ethic and all, but are you sure you even really want to get back to this guy? I mean, it kind of looks like he's back on the market already. And then a fire suddenly appeared in front of Meg, and she could see images in the fire. And in the fire, there was Aegis, standing near the ocean with his arms around a woman with long blonde hair, and they were whispering to each other and nuzzling each other. And then the woman kissed him. And Meg's like, no. She's like, he loves me. And Hades is like, he's like, this is real. He's like, I'm not making this stuff up. Hades like, the world is a cruel place, Meg. He's like, remember what your mother told you? That you couldn't trust other people? Hades is like, he's moved on, my little nutmeg. He's like, don't take it personal. He's a guy, it's in his nature. And Meg thought, well, if he could move on to someone else after I just sacrificed everything for him in like a week, she'd only been working for Hades for about a week, and he's already moved on to someone else. Well, he must not have loved me at all, ever. And Meg asks Hades, she's like, who is she? And Hades is like, well, I mean, it doesn't really matter, but her name's Katrina. And right then and there, Meg decided that Aegis was dead to her. She's like, let's get to work. Let's get back to work. Now back to Athena. Meg tells her that she'll do it, but how is she supposed to find somebody that she's never even met before? Plus, there was the whole issue that there were these, rules that mortals couldn't just, travel in and out of the underworld. Now, when Meg had been in debt to Hades, it seemed to be some kind of a gray area, or there was some sort of exception made for her at that time, but not now. And then this person was already deceased. So yeah, not to mention she had to do it on a deadline. So Athena told her to start by going to Aegis and finding out everything that she could about Katrina. She also told Phil that he was to accompany Meg to the entrance of the underworld. But just to that point, he couldn't go into the underworld with her. Then Athena gave Meg her flute. She said that she should take it with her because it could aid her. I really liked this point. I feel like it was saying that we should use our talents and our gifts to help us through our challenges and struggles in life. Then Athena told Meg that, I'll assist you whenever possible, whenever I can. And, there had been legends of Athena helping heroes on their quests. And Meg felt, kind of good about this, that, Athena felt that she was worthy of her help. Athena then told her that she could only complete this quest if she believed that she could. And she told her, don't fall victim to distractions. She said that, sometimes when you have to make decisions about stuff, sometimes you're going to need to listen to your head, and other times you're going to have to listen to your heart. And then she faded away. So then Meg and Phil rode Pegasus to Athens. Meg knew that Aegis lived there because they had spent a lot of time there together. When they got there, she knocked on his door, and when he opened the door, he was shocked to see her. He started bawling, and Meg was shocked to see him with a baby girl. So Meg had to take a little bit of time to try and calm him down. And then, seeing him again kind of brought up stuff for her, and all her resentment about him and all the crap that he put her through and everything that she did for him. And she kind of just all let it out right then and there. But he seemed kind of confused, like he didn't know what she was talking about. And he started to try to explain himself. But Meg was like, she's like, I'm doing all the talking now. And she explains everything, why she's there, and how she needs to know everything about Katrina because she's gonna go to the underworld and bring her back. And he's like, you're bringing her back? He's like, oh my God, thank you. And he starts bawling even more. And this gets Meg upset. She's like, I'm sick of this constant crying. She's like, this type of thing, it's not my bag, like emotions and stuff. So she whistles for Pegasus, and she jumps on his back, and they take off. So while they're flying through the air, she starts thinking about Hercules. And she wished she could see him and maybe get some guidance from him. So she tells Pegasus to land in a meadow, and she pulls out the orchid. She plucks one of the petals and holds it up to the sun, and she says, Hercules. And in a flash of light, he suddenly appears in front of her. So she fills him in on everything that happened, you know, finding Athena's flute, fighting the Impusa, seeing Athena, and Athena's insistence that Meg talk to Aegis. And Hercules is like, wow, you know, that must have been really tough to have to see Aegis. And Meg's like, yeah, and I have to go to the underworld and bring back Katrina. Hercules was shocked. This was a very tough quest. But he knew that she could do it, and he offered his help in any way that he could give. He also suggested that Meg give Aegis a chance to explain. And then Hercules disappeared. Now, when she got back to Aegis' house, Phil apparently had told him everything about the deal that she had made with Hades for his life, and about, you know, Athena's flute and the Impusa and all the stuff. Now, Aegis told her what had happened when he woke up. She wasn't there. He figured that she had gone somewhere to get help. But after a while, when she hadn't come back, he started to worry. He started asking around. Nobody had seen her. He put up flyers. He knocked on doors. For almost 2 years, he searched for her. And Meg was like, 2 years? And he's like, yeah, 2 years. But after 2 years, you know, he kind of had to accept the fact that she was gone and move forward in life. And, you know, she was thinking to herself, was it longer down there than I thought it was? She had seen plenty of souls come through Hades' door, thinking they'd only been dead for a few moments, when they'd actually been dead for years. So time moved much quicker down there. So is that what happened to her too? Did the days that passed really equate to months? So it's starting to all make sense. In order for Hades to keep her working for him, he needed to make sure that she didn't go running to Aegis when up on Earth doing his dirty work. Now, the only way to do this was to make sure that Aegis thought that she was dead. So he kept Meg down in the underworld for as long as it took for Aegis to think that she was dead. Then, to make sure that, you know, when she got up to Earth's side, she wouldn't go searching for him still, Hades needed Meg to hate Aegis. And what better way to get a woman to hate a man than for her to think that he cheated? Now, getting back to Katrina, Meg asked Aegis, you know, how did she die? And Aegis told her that, you know, one night there was the worst storm they had ever experienced, and they thought that their house was going to collapse, so they had to get out of there. So Aegis picks up the baby, and he goes running out of the house with Katrina right behind him. But a big river came, a flood, and swept her away. And now at the base of the hill where they lived, there was an actual river, like still there. And Meg hadn't remembered this river being there before when she used to hang out in these parts. So Meg asked him, she's like, when did this all happen? And he was like, oh, it was just like a few days ago. So Meg was thinking, she's like, oh my gosh, this happened when the Titans were out running amok, you know, before Hercules came along and saved everybody. So it was the Titans and the gods fighting that caused this flood and took Katrina's life. Then Aegis told Meg, you know, a little bit about her earlier life. As a kid, she had had a little sister who died, and it really affected her. Now, the next morning, Phil asks Meg, he's like, so where are we headed? What are we doing? And Meg's thinking, and she's looking around, and she's looking at the river, and she notices that the river flows in the opposite direction of the ocean. It moved inland and then disappeared behind a mountain range. And something tells Meg that, you know, because this is a very odd phenomenon, that this could be the river that leads to the underworld, because there's a couple of different rivers that all connect, and then that's the entrance to the underworld. So her instincts are telling her that they need to follow this river. And Phil tells her, well, you know, for mortals to take this river to the underworld, they need to be in a boat. I guess that's the rules. So here Aegis is able to help. He has a little fishing boat, and him and Phil get it into the water. And while they're doing this, Meg is holding the baby. Her name's Cassia. And they're playing with a little rattle, and Meg, for some reason, decides to take the rattle from the baby and put it in her satchel. So as they're sailing down this river, she's looking down into the water. It's super dark and it's churning, and it's kind of familiar. Kind of gives her an uneasy feeling. It reminds her of, I think it's the river Styx that, you know, you're supposed to sail down to get to the underworld, where all the lost souls are. They're moaning in anguish and trying to climb into the boat because they don't understand what's going on. But her gut told her they were on the right path. Now, while they're on the river, the god Hermes shows up, and he has a couple of gifts from Athena. She said it could help them on their quest. And one is a bow and arrow, and the other is some sort of strange clapping device called a crotola, I think is how you pronounce it. And when Meg tried it, it let out this terrible screech sound, and everyone held their ears. Hermes told her that, you know, Athena had made it for her, that, you know, it was to be used when she got reckless. So they're continuing down the river, and Meg spots an orchard with golden apples. Now, Meg wanted to go get a couple of these apples because she knew that Hades liked them. She had seen him eating them quite a bit in the underworld. So she thought if she could grab some of these apples, she might be able to use them as leverage or a bargaining chip of some kind. But Phil was like, oh, no, don't go over there. He's like, those apples are not meant for mortals. And Meg just ignored him because, you know, she's like, they're not for me. But as soon as she grabbed one, there was a terrible screeching sound that filled the air. And all these giant birds came flying out of nowhere, and they attacked her. Then a bunch of roots came from underneath the ground and started choking her. And right when you thought all hope was lost, Hercules comes flying out of the sky, and he saves Meg and Phil and Pegasus. Meg had tried to use the gifts that Athena had given her, and they helped a little, but not enough. I don't think she knew how to use them correctly. Now, Meg was a little upset about this because this was her quest. And how was she supposed to face the challenges of the underworld if every time she got in trouble, Hercules came to save the day? And Hercules is like, oh, he's like, I'm sorry, I just wanted to help. And Meg's like, I don't need your help. And then, right then, Hermes shows up again. And he's like, oh, you're needed back home immediately. So Hercules disappeared. And then, of course, Meg instantly felt terrible about what she said to him and the tone in which she did it. It wasn't very nice. So they get back in the boat and they're going down the river. And after a while, they near the base of a mountain and they can see a river running through it. It was the entrance to the underworld. And then a small boat comes towards them, and it's ferried by a skeleton type looking creature. Now his name, I had to look up the pronunciation. The first pronunciation was Charon or Karen. Literally, the guy that ferries you to the underworld's name is Karen. It's hilarious. So I'm going to pronounce it Charon so that we can distinguish him from a Karen. You guys, I love this Kiss liner lash glue. Meg's putting on lashes like super quick and easy. If you have trouble putting on lashes, get some of that. Okay, so Charon, he would ferry people to the underworld. He comes up to them and he sniffs the air and he's like, mortals can't come in here. What are you guys doing here? You gotta go. And Meg's like, no. She's like, you can take us. She's like, we'll pay you. And she turns to Phil and she's like, pay the man. And Phil's like, I don't have any money. So apparently you have to pay Charon to escort you to the underworld. Otherwise, he makes you wait. Kind of like Genie Plus for the underworld. Leave it to Disney. So Meg starts to panic. She doesn't know what to do. So she prays to Athena and a coin manifests in her hand. So she pays Charon and he lets her onto his boat. And this is where Meg, Phil, and Pegasus have to part ways. So she's on the boat, they enter into the cave, and she can hear the souls moaning and see their hands trying to get up into the boat. So then they come upon Cerberus. Now Cerberus is a 3-headed dog, massive, huge, gigantic dog that guards the entrance to the underworld. So no mortal is gonna get past him without being swallowed whole. But her plan is to use Athena's flute to lull him to sleep and sneak by him. So she plays Plight of the Lily, the first song she taught herself to play. And she tells herself, she's like, okay, just focus and play. Forget he's even there. And I liked this part too, because I felt like it was saying, you know, when you have a challenge in life or something you want to accomplish, don't focus on how hard it's going to be or all the, you know, terrible things that could happen. Just focus on doing good work. So anyway, her plan works. He falls asleep and her and Charon continue down to the river to the underworld. Now, there are 3 levels to the underworld. There's Elysium, which is where all the like super good people go, like the Mother Teresas and just people who were above reproach during their life. Then there's Tartarus, and this is where really bad people go. Then there's Asphodel Meadows. Now I think in actual mythology it's called Asphodel Fields, but in this book they call it Asphodel Meadows. I might be wrong on that, but I think that's what I read. This is where most people go. This is where people who, you know, maybe they made some mistakes in their life, but for the most part, they tried to be good and they did, you know, okay during life. So this is where most people end up because this is the story of most people's lives, right? So Meg reasons that Katrina is gonna be in Asphodel Meadows since that's where most people end up. Now, etched into the stone walls everywhere in the underworld are signs directing you to these different levels. So on her way to Asphodel Meadows, she runs into Hades. He takes her back to his lair and he demands to know what she's doing there. And she tells him, she says that she's there on a quest and that she has to bring back a lost soul. And Hades is like, who put you up to this? And she tells him it was Hera. And he gets extremely pissed off. The flame on his head goes. He grabs her and he holds her over a cliff. And then right then, Pain and Panic come in and they're like, the Fates are here and they want to see you. They said it was about the underworld stowaway. And Hades, like, he's like, oh, okay, yeah, I'll be right there. And he, without even thinking, he just drops Meg. Meg goes falling down a dark ravine. Pain and Panic go rushing off to tell the Fates that he's on his way. Hades waits for them to leave. And then he says, it's okay, you can come out now. And a beautiful woman comes out. And she's like, are they gone? She's like, what did the Fates want? She's like, I am not going back there. I don't care what they say. And Hades is like, no, 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 don't worry. He goes over to her and he puts his arms around her and he's being all like lovey with this woman. He's like, I'm on my way to see what they want right now. Don't worry. He's like, why don't you go and do that thing you like to do so much? It'll keep your mind off of it. And she's like, yeah, I'll do that. He's like, again, don't worry. We're gonna make sure that the future is in our favor, even if we have to burn the whole world to the ground. And then he leaves. Now Meg, plummeting to her death with her hands out in front of her, she's able to somehow manage to grab onto something, and then her body goes slamming up against the cliff. But actually it wasn't a cliff, it was a spiraling staircase. So she's able to lift herself up onto this staircase and continue on her way. She had expected Hades to show up, but he didn't, so he must be busy with the fates. So she better, hurry this along before he realizes that she didn't plummet to her death. So she makes it to Asphodel Meadows. It's actually pretty much just like Earth. And she's asking around for Katrina, asking people, if anybody knows her. She's telling everybody that she's new there. And one lady's like, well, if you're new, you need to go to the Evergreen. The Evergreen was where all the newbies were expected to go when they arrived. On her way, she runs into a woman gardening. She's planting hydrangeas. I cannot say that word to save my life. Hydrangeas. Sorry. Meg's mother had loved hydrangeas and she stopped to admire them. And she strikes up a conversation with this woman. They're just, small talk. And then Meg realizes, I'm getting distracted. I gotta continue on my way. So she does. Now, once she gets to the Evergreen, she starts asking around again. Does anybody know Katrina? Again, nobody seems to know her. But then Meg remembers about her little sister that had died. Her name was Layla. So she figures, when she got here, she must have met up with her. So then she starts asking around, where do the children go when they arrive? And somebody directs her to a poppy field. When she gets to the poppy field, again, she's asking around for Katrina and Layla. And then all of a sudden, she hears somebody humming a song that Aegis used to play constantly. So she pulls out her flute and she plays the song too, hoping that, this person, wherever they are, will just come to her. And she plays the song, and when she's done, she looks down and there's a little girl standing at her feet looking up at her. And the little girl says, I know that song. And Meg says, you do? She's like, are you Layla? And the little girl's like, yeah. And then Meg says, do you have a sister named Katrina? And Layla's like, yeah, you want to meet her? You come with me. And so she follows the little girl up to a hill. And there she sees her, Katrina, sitting on the top of a hill, looking out over the sunset. And Meg is just like, her heart is pounding. This is the woman that she spent so much time hating. So she goes up to her and she introduces herself and she just starts telling her everything. She's like, I've been sent here by the gods to retrieve your soul and take you back to your family. But, we gotta kind of hurry this along before Hades finds us. But Katrina did not know what she was talking about. She didn't have any memory of a family, a daughter. She didn't even have a memory of how she died. And Meg couldn't understand why she couldn't remember her family. She keeps trying to re-explain it. But again, she just doesn't know what she's talking about. And finally, Meg's getting kind of frustrated and she's like, don't you want to live again? And Katrina kind of takes offense to this and she's like, I am living here in the underworld with my sister. This is where I choose to spend eternity. I choose to spend eternity with her. So please, just leave us alone. Then Meg realized what she was asking of this woman, what she was asking her to leave behind, remembering her own mother's death and how much she longed to be with her again. Then Meg said to Katrina, you know, someone once told me that we imprint the lost on our hearts. Aegis had actually told Meg that this is something that Katrina had told him when he was still mourning Meg. But Katrina was still set on staying with Layla. Then Meg thought, well, maybe I can use the orchid to show Katrina the land of the living, her family back on Earth, and show her what she's missing. So she takes out the orchid and she tells Katrina, I can show you what you're missing out on. And she plucks one of the petals, but Katrina grabs it from her and she tears it up. She's like, I don't want to see what I'm missing out on. And her and Layla go storming off. Now Meg is really upset. She's at a loss about what to do next. And now she'd wasted one of the petals for nothing. She felt a clink on her wrist and there was panic. And he's like, gotcha. He's like, Hades wants to see you right away. He snaps his finger and they disappear. And seconds later, they reappear in Hades' throne room. And Hades is like, oh, so you're still alive. Well, I'll fix that. And Meg's like, well, don't you even want to know why Hera sent me here? And Hades is like, nope. And Meg's like, well, I told Katrina everything. And Hades is like, who's Katrina?
Who's Deanna?
And Meg is like, you know, my ex-flame's new wife. Hera wants her back. And if you don't do as they ask, there's gonna be consequences. And by the way, why doesn't she remember her family? Did you do that? And Hades is like, I don't know. Like, I don't know why she doesn't remember. Maybe it was some sort of divine mistake. And Meg thought about this and she's like, was her memory thing some sort of mistake on the gods' part? And Meg, had to undo that too. Just then, a woman comes in and she's like, I'm sorry, I couldn't stay away. What did the fates say? And then she looks over at Meg and she's like, oh, it's you. And Meg is like, huh, it's you. It was the woman that she had had the conversation with about the hygendras. And Hades is like, you two know each other? So this woman tells Hades about their conversation, about her flowers. And she's like, Hades, like, leave her alone. She's nice. And Hades is like, fine. And Meg is like, what this? She's like, she'd never seen Hades so docile. Then the woman introduces herself as Persephone. And Meg is like, you're Persephone? She's like, you're Demeter's daughter. She's like, everyone on Mount Olympus is looking for you. Then Persephone gets like a frightened look on her face and she looks at Hades and she's like, who is this? And Hades like, this is Megara. You know, the one who ruined my plans to overthrow Zeus? And Persephone is like, oh, you're Meg? She's like, that means you're with Hercules, which means you can tell my mother where I am. And she goes running into Hades' arms and she's like, we'll be ruined. She's like, my mother will come and take me away. She's like, Hades, throw her in the fire. And Meg, thinking quickly, she's like, no, you don't want to do that because I can help you stay together. So Meg tells them about her orchid and how if they let her, she will use the last petal to summons a god there and convince them to let Persephone stay with Hades half of the year if the other half of the year she tends to her earthly duties. And Persephone is like, well, what are you gonna get out of all this? And Meg tells them, you know, about her quest and about how she wants to take Katrina back with her. And she says, if you just give me the chance to finish my quest, I'll use my last petal to call Hera here. And so they agree to this, and Peg pulls the last petal from her orchid and calls on Hera. So she materializes right there in Hades' lair, and Meg convinces her of this whole, half a year deal thing. And then Hera turns to Meg and she's like, "You've done well." And then she disappears. And then Hades sends Meg back to Asphodel Meadows. There, she catches up with Layla and Katrina again. And again, she tries to convince Katrina to come back, but she still doesn't remember her family and wants Meg to just leave them alone. Then Meg feels the rattle in her satchel. And she pulls it out and she gives it to Katrina. She says, "Well, I basically failed my mission." She checked her hourglass. It was almost down to nothing. She's like, "You might as well have this." And of course, as soon as Katrina touches the rattle, all her memories come flooding back to her. She remembers her family, she remembers her baby, and she remembers how she died. And now she wants to go home. But what about Layla? Layla wouldn't be allowed to return with her. But Layla comes up and she's like, "It's gonna be fine." She's like, "I'll be okay. I was here for quite some time before you showed up and I was fine then." And then she's like, "I can't wait to meet your baby someday." She turns around and she goes running off without a second goodbye. So Katrina turns to Meg and she's like, "Are we too late?" Now Meg was like, well, she knew about a special boat that was coming to pick up Persephone. And she hoped that, well, if they can make it there before she leaves, maybe they can hitch a ride with her. But they would really need to hurry. But then all of a sudden, they disappear. And they reappear at the shore of the river Styx. And Persephone was there, and she's like, "Hey," she's like, "I heard your prayer, so I just snapped my fingers." She's like, "It's okay, you can leave with me." And then Charon's boat pulls up, and they all climb inside. There was a catch, though. The rules for Persephone to be able to go back and forth between the underworld and the living world was that when she was on the boat leaving the underworld, she could not turn back and look at the underworld. And so the same rules were going to apply to Meg and Katrina, and they were fine with that. So as the boat is pulling away, Hades shows up. And he's like, "Hey, don't you guys want to say goodbye to your loved ones?" And Meg turns to Katrina and she's like, "Whatever he says, don't turn around. Whatever happens, don't turn around. Layla is going to be okay, I promise." Then Meg hears her mother's voice. And she's saying, Meg, where are you? I can't find you. I heard you were here, but I can't find you." And Katrina turns to Meg and she's like, "It's okay, don't turn around. Think about what's at stake." And Meg starts crying and she's like, "Will my mother understand?" And she's like, "I have a great opportunity in front of me. Will she understand that I don't want my past to trip me up and endanger my future?" And then she hears her mother's voice again and she says, "I understand and I love you." And then Meg lifts up her head and she sees the light at the end of the tunnel. Ugh. Why do I do this? Do my makeup and then get emotional. So they're nearing the end of the river and Meg looks down at her hourglass and it's run out of time. She failed. She didn't get her quest done in time. But she prays to Hera and she asks her that she still allow Katrina to go back to the land of the living because she deserved to be with her family again. So when they get to shore, Persephone thanks Meg for helping her and then she disappears. And Meg, she hadn't materialized back in the underworld. So she reasoned that Hera, you know, was like, well, you know, she failed, but I'll let her, you know, at least return to the land of the living, even though she doesn't, you know, get to be a god now. Which means that Hercules was now no longer hers to love. So she tells Katrina, well, let's get you home. Then they hear a loud neigh and they look up into the sky and it's Pegasus and he's flying towards them. And so then Pegasus takes them back to Age's house where Katrina and him are reunited. And Phil was there too. And he wanted to hear everything. But then he was like, hey, aren't you a god now? Why aren't you on Mount Olympus with Hercules? And Meg, you know, explained it to him. And she's like, you know, I accomplished the tasks, but I didn't do it in time. And she's like, but, you know, Katrina was reunited with her baby, which was what was most important. You know, and she was like, you know, I just wish I could see Hercules just one last time because, you know, it was his love that inspired this whole thing anyway. And you know, she said she didn't realize how much she had loved him until she lost him. Then Hera and Athena appear before them and they're like, well done, Meg, you acted as a true hero and you've learned what true love really is. And Meg's like, well, thanks. And they're like, you know, in your hour of need you still thought of others. And because of that, we're gonna allow you to see Hercules one last time. And then he appears. And they run into each other's arms. And Meg knows, you know, they don't have a lot of time, but there's so much she wants to tell him. And she says, you know, I need to apologize to you. I'm sorry that I didn't accept your help. I now know that love means being there for each other, showing up for one another, trusting each other, and knowing that that doesn't make you look weak. And she's like, you know, sorry. She's like, you know, people do crazy things when they're in love. Then Hera comes up and interrupts. She says, you know, I can see that you really make my son happy and you've more than proven your worth. And she looks over at Katrina and Aegis and Cassia, and she's like, you know, Cassia, with the guidance of her parents, is gonna become a amazing hero one day. And then it dawns on Meg. Oh, she's like, oh, okay, well, that's why the gods were so, you know, keen on getting Katrina back to the land of the living. Then a dove comes flying down and lands on Hera's shoulder. And it has a little glass bottle with it. And Hera takes the glass bottle and she hands it to Meg and she's like, drink this. She says, you know, I know you didn't complete your task in time, but the gods always find a way to help a hero when they show a true heart. And you've done that, Meg. So Meg immediately drinks the potion and her skin starts to glow and she starts to transform into a god. And she now knows that her place is with Wonder Boy and that they are going to do great work together. And Hera names her the god of vulnerability because she has a knack to hear a mortal in need more than any other god. And anytime a mortal feels self-doubt or acts too proudly, Meg steps in and tries to steer them in the right direction. Now later, once Meg has been a god for a little while, she arranges for her own mother to be a surrogate mother to Layla. This ensures that Layla has somebody to take care of her in the underworld, and it gives her mother a second chance at being the type of mother that she couldn't be on Earth. Meg also goes to Katrina and tells Katrina all this so that she knows that Meg kept her promise and that Layla is okay. The end. Yeah, so that is Go the Distance, A Twisted Tale. I really liked this book, if you can't tell. I think this one is probably my second favorite after the Cinderella Twisted Tale. It obviously struck something in me. I felt maybe it was just because of all the Greek mythology, but I really loved the symbolism in this one. I feel like they got it just right, which is lately Disney has been missing the mark on, but not in this one. So thank you, Jen. But yeah, I would highly recommend reading this book. Obviously, I have to kind of skip a lot of stuff for the sake of time. And even with that, these videos are still pretty long. So thank you if you're still here. So yeah, if you want to read this book, I will leave a link to it on Amazon. It's not an affiliate link. I just put it there for your convenience. If you have read this book, let me know in the comments. Let me know if you interpreted it the same way I did, if you picked up on the same symbolism that I did. I'm one of those people that always kind of feels like they're a character in a movie or a book, and I look at everything in my life through the lens of this kind of symbolism, and I'm always, you know, always drawing parallels between my life and stories. So if you're that kind of person too, let me know. I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing. I like it. Anyway, if you liked this video, let me know by giving it a thumbs up. It's how I know what kind of videos to make, and it lets me know you care. Make sure and subscribe and hit the notifications bell so that you won't miss the next Disney book summary that I do while I do my makeup. And I will see you in the next one. Bye. Also, there are a lot. She kind of, but she felt her fingers slip, and he just is like, Does chocolate milk make anyone else cough? She's like, oh, what did the fates? Hera wants her back, and if you... I'm sorry, I couldn't stay away. What did the fates say? So as the bullet... And she looks over at...